Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and Reimagine Main Street for this very important discussion on back to business, restarting Main Streets in the wake of COVID-19. We'll now turn the program over to my colleague, Rhett Buttle.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Just over a year ago, several national business leaders convened for the first of many virtual roundtables to discuss two things. The first was the potential extinction of small businesses across America from COVID-19. The second was the murder of George Floyd and countless other Black Americans and the state of race and equity in our country. To face this unprecedented crisis, a diverse multi-stakeholder group of organizations banded together to form Reimagine Main Street. We're an initiative focused on making sure small businesses and their workers recover and build back better. Since then, this amazing group has released the largest survey of diverse business owners in the country to help generate insights for the market and government. We've met with several policymakers and senior business leaders, and we've continued to convene monthly to strategize, share information, and advance solutions. Today, we gather on a critical day to talk about the light at the end of the tunnel, but with an eye towards very important work ahead. We have an amazing set of government and business leaders to help us break down research, share insights, and discuss how we move forward. And later, we're going to hear findings from our most recent survey of business owners being released to help guide the way, and an amazing panel of CEOs from the U.S. Black Chamber, the U.S. Hispanic Chamber, and National ACE. With that, it's my pleasure to turn the conversation over to the Senior Advisor to the President, Congressman Cedric Richmond, and Senior Vice President at PayPal, Franz Pache, who will kick off the conversation. Franz, over to you.
Thank you. And thank you, Rhett. Thank you. I just want to make sure the video is on. Okay. Thanks so much, Rhett. It's always great to be working with you and collaborating with you. And a special thank you to Reimagining Main Street, to Tammy and Renee, and to the Coalition of Chambers of Commerce that have made it possible to bring us all together here today. We all are together because we share a commitment to supporting an inclusive recovery. And we know that supporting small businesses is a core part of that effort. And we know that during this past year, it has been particularly important for us to be supporting Black-owned small businesses and small businesses owned and led by underrepresented minorities. At PayPal, we've been very focused on doing our part to advance racial equity in this environment, to work to close the racial wealth gap, and to make a contribution to empowering small businesses that have been inordinately affected by the pandemic. We know that this works only in partnership with the public sector, and that has come in a number of different forms through the Paycheck Protection Program, where PayPal was proud to be one of the institutions that distributed loans. And we distributed over $2 billion in loans last year, and the average size was $29,000. We also worked hard with other companies to make sure that we could do our part to provide relief, both direct relief in terms of grants to Main Street businesses, but also lending relief and being able to support and sustain Black-owned businesses in their communities. It's an enormous challenge, and we've got a long road ahead. But we also know that it's all about private and public partnership. And that's why it's really an honor for me to have the opportunity to have a conversation today with Congressman Cedric Richmond, who, as I think everyone on this call knows, is currently serving as senior advisor to the president and director of the White House Office of Public Engagement. Many of you know Congressman Richmond from his service with distinction for the 2nd Congressional District of Louisiana, and also his work with the Biden-Harris campaign and his leadership of the transition team, and also as chairing the Congressional Black Caucus. So it's an honor for me to be sharing the screen. And I want to kick off with a question, and it'll be a broad question because I want to sort of set the context. You've played many roles in government, but right now I know that part of your focus is on how to facilitate private public sector partnership. And I was hoping you could start by sharing a bit of an overview of your role in the administration and the work that's underway on this front.
Well, the truth is, we do it because it's important, but it's part of our responsibility. But we've been engaged, either myself or Zach, with the business community for an awfully long time. And I think that when you start talking about small business, especially the people who really bust their tails every day to keep a business open, to keep people employed, and they employ more than anyone else in this country, it's important that they have a real seat at the table, real input. And that helps us in terms of making sure that we have a administration that is inclusive, transparent, accountable, and responsible to its citizens. And those citizens, a lot of which are small business owners. So we want to make sure that we have meaningful dialogue between the Biden-Harris administration, small business owners, and those in the private and public sector who are seeking to engage. And oftentimes we reach out to people who may not be seeking, but people who we need their input. So we like to sum it up as this. A lot of times government agencies or administrations will reach out to people when they need their output. Well, our goal is to reach out to individuals when we need their input and their output, because we think it should be a two-way street. And then the other thing is our role is to help the private sector navigate the bureaucracy of the federal government, try to make it as streamlined as possible, and try to make sure that we're doing everything we can to help them be successful in their businesses, create more jobs, and sustain more families. And so between us and the SBA, we want to make sure that we're helping to facilitate that. And then the last thing I'll say on this, and I know how important it is to the president, is that small business, the reason why he elevated the SBA to a cabinet position is because he wants to empower more small businesses than anyone in the history of the country. And he wants to make sure that the SBA has the attention and the tools that it needs to do that.
Yeah, I'd love to follow up on that and ask you to say a bit more about the PPP loan program and how that program has evolved during the pandemic. I know it's a key part of the administration's strategy, but I'd love to get your perspective as to that program, how it's evolved, and how you see its impact.
Well, we learned the hard way in the beginning. PPP was, for lack of a better, more educated definition, it was a mess. And especially for small businesses trying to navigate it, the money was sucked up by the large corporations quickly out of the gate, and we left a lot of small businesses out there fending for themselves, and they were able to survive through that initial one. But we're happy that they held on long enough for our administration and the changes we've made to PPP to hold on, because the changes we made through the American Rescue Plan, we believe were heroic but necessary. And so for the millions of Main Street small businesses, especially Black and Brown owned small businesses, we know that they had to struggle through the health aspect of the pandemic, but also the economic struggles of the pandemic, the economic crisis. And so to date, I think that just our administration, we've distributed more than $250 billion in relief to $250 billion in relief to millions of hard-hit small businesses. But more importantly, 95% of the PPP loans going to Main Street businesses with less than 20 employees. And that's where we believe the rubber meets the road. And that's in those small businesses that are located smack dab in communities, serve communities, employ people out of the communities, employ a lot of at-risk people who live in the community. We have to invest and make sure that those businesses thrive, because actually I think that those businesses more than any are really the canary in the coal mine, because as they succeed and flourish, we know that the economy and the country will do the same. So we know the struggles. More than 400 small businesses have closed since the beginning of the pandemic, and we want to send that in the opposite way. If you look at what we've been able to do since we took office. We've created right around 500,000 jobs a month, more than any other president to ever come before us. But we're doing it because we're intentional and we're getting input from everybody. So we're proud of what we were able to do with PPP and then now the restaurant bill. And when we get the American Families Plan passed, you'll see us continuing to keep our head down and improve the economy for small businesses and working families.
Yeah, I'd love to follow up on those two programs in particular, which I know are a core part of the American Rescue Plan. The Restaurant Revitalization Fund. I mean, we know that restaurants were particularly hard hit, and it's been an important priority, I think, for all of us to focus on that industry. Could you share more about how that fund works and what you see going forward for restaurants and the revitalization work ahead?
Coming from the great city of New Orleans, which is a great port city, but we're also a big tourist city, and tourism is a big part of our economy. And restaurants and that whole industry are critical, and we know how many people restaurants employ. So Congress, through Rescue Plan, we allocated nearly $30 billion for restaurants, which we hope will allow hundreds of thousands of restaurants to receive money to stay open or to reopen. And I think that that's the important part, stay or reopen. Yeah. The program, we expect to be oversubscribed, which is a good thing in terms of making sure that we use every dollar that we have. But unfortunately, a few businesses may not get it, but there's additional help out there. So let's think about the employee retention tax credit, which allows small businesses to cover up to $28,000 per employee in payroll costs. And we just want you to know that you can do that retroactively too. So we want to help you through this pandemic. Some things we can do directly, some things we will do through tax credits, but we're going to continue to do everything we can to help small businesses, especially those small restaurants, to survive.
So another aspect of the recovery that I wanted to have a chance to discuss is the rollout of vaccines and how important that has been to the recovery. As you may have seen, Reimagine Main Street released a survey today that shows that small businesses are feeling more optimism, based on the kind of support coming from the administration, but also on what's happening with the rollout of vaccines. And in fact, one of the first ways that our company interacted with the administration was around that call to action a few months back on how the private sector could help with the rollout of vaccines. And we partnered with Uber on a vaccine access fund, but I know many companies stepped up to help on this. How are you seeing the role of the rollout, the progress of the rollout of getting Americans vaccinated, and what that means for putting the economy back on track over the next several months?
Well, you can't get the economy back on track without beating COVID. And we knew that coming into the administration. Back in December, we made a pledge to give out 100 million shots in the first 100 days. Fast forward, in the first 100 days, we did well over 220 million shots. We're well over 250 million shots now. Today or tomorrow, we would expect to vaccinate 50% of all adults in the country fully vaccinated. And so we're making great progress. I won't say that was the low-hanging fruit, because it took us buying more vaccinations. It took us using community health centers, using mobile vaccination units, empowering 40,000 pharmacies to give them out, making sure that people could get vaccinated within 5 miles of their house for 95% of the country. So it wasn't easy, but those were people who wanted to get it. And now we're going to deal with a little bit more of a challenging population, but we have to get there. So we're going to need help from small businesses to encourage their employees to get it, and their customers and the communities that they serve, and to make it easy for them to do it. And we know that that's going to be very key to getting to our 70% goal that we had. And some of it will be making sure that there's paid time off to go get the vaccination if you have any complications where you may have to miss work for a day due to the vaccine, that you're compensated for, because we know so many people can't afford to lose a day or two of work. And so making sure that we think of this and service the needs of people, the real needs of people, we think we can get there. And so if you have a business that is popular, you have a business that with a lot of employees, then maybe you should host a vaccination effort on campus. And, we have people that would help you do that. And then the others to create some incentives. We see some really interesting incentives around the country from governors. I think it's the Ohio governor that has people who get vaccinated get entered into a lottery. And those numbers are very high, but hey, we need to vaccinate people to beat this. And we think with the paid leave, the time off, all of those things, with the ride sharing between Lyft and Uber, all of the things we're doing to launch out of the box thinking to get it done, it's going to take all hands on deck. So we just appreciate everybody that's helping us. Even United just yesterday launched a sweepstakes called Your Shot to Fly, and that's to give vaccinated customers the chance to win a year of free flights in an effort to promote vaccination. So we just appreciate the business community partnering with us to get it done.
Yeah, I think this has been a great example of where the business community and the administration and the public sector around many states have really collaborated to move this forward. I wanted to, and I know our time is limited, but I wanted to talk a bit about all of the efforts that the administration is making to ensure that the recovery is an inclusive recovery. And again, I'll cite to some of the data that Reimagine Main Street has put out that Black and AAPI Native and Hispanic business owners are seeing a long road to recovery, especially for small businesses. And we know that the environment in this country, which has been, we've had for far too long, all forms of bias and systemic racism and other barriers for entrepreneurs and for small businesses owned by people of color who may have barriers to access to capital and to other support systems. I'd welcome your advice and insight on the kinds of investments we need to make, both from the private sector and the public sector, to help enable a more inclusive recovery, and for all of us to do our part to spur wealth creation and empowerment in underserved communities.
I so appreciate that question. And part of it I'm going to talk about is things that you all can do and a challenge to you all. But first, we need to pass the American Jobs Plan, because within the American Jobs Plan, we would create a new grant program through the MBDA that would particularly help Black and Brown businesses and manufacturers access capital. And then that we're pushing the SBA to process forgiveness applications faster. And we don't have any news to make today, but here's the other thing. As much as we talk about access to capital, a friend of mine and a gentleman that has helped me tremendously, we had a long conversation, and he's an investment banker. And part of what he said was, look, as important as access to capital is, access to contracts may be greater. And so to the businesses that are here, that we would just challenge you all to look at how you procure goods and services, and not just down your supply chain, but your law firms, your accountants, your auditors. I don't care if you have a fleet of cars, who washes your cars, who services them, who does the oil change. And if we're very intentional about using small businesses in the community, then they can take that access to capital and also that access to contracts to really invest back in the small businesses and into the business, create more jobs, and become more, increase their sustainability. And I think that that's important, but that can't come all from government. We can't do it all, but we really need partners out there being intentional about what we're doing. And so when we think of the American Jobs Plan, we're talking about a once in a lifetime investment into infrastructure, both human infrastructure and human capital, and our roads, bridges, our airports, our seaports, to make sure we can get goods to market. So we're making incredible investments that businesses are going to benefit from. But at the same time, we want businesses to have that same vested interest in making sure that small businesses and employees reap the same benefits. And so this is going to be a shared effort, in our opinion, but we really want the private sector out there to help us. So we will work on access to capital, and to the extent we can, we'll work on access to contracts, and we'll make sure that we pay small businesses faster so that they don't have to float payroll as long. We know that that is an unnecessary stress on small businesses. They just can't afford to float a lot of payroll for months and months at a time. But we want our business community to also be very intentional about access to contracts for minority-owned businesses as we recover.
Yeah, I think that's a very powerful message for the coalition of organizations that are on this line and all of the businesses represented. I know we're up to time. I want to just ask for one final word of, if there's one takeaway for the organizations and businesses on this line about how we can step up to help accelerate the recovery for small businesses in underserved communities. Is there one call to action that we should take away as we think about this conversation and all the conversations that we're going to be having throughout the day?
Well, no, not from our standpoint. We may have about 10 calls to action for you all. I mean, the good news is today, for the first time since this pandemic began, cases are down in all 50 states. So we're seeing the results of our hard work and the work of the administration to get that done. But we still have work to do in terms of vaccinating people. We have the goal to get to 70% of adults by July 4th in terms of at least one shot. 7 states have already hit this goal. So we're going to work on it, and getting vaccinated won't be easier for a person to do than it is right now. But with our business community, small businesses especially, because you touch so many working families and regular everyday people, it's important for you also to use the voice that you have to demand better things from government, demand bipartisanship, demand sensible voting rights, demand people actually look at facts versus fiction. We're in a dangerous situation if for the first time in this country, people can just deny what the whole world saw. And so if we just look at January 6th, for example, you have people now, and people are starting to believe that those were tourists in the Capitol. I would just tell you, I was there. I was looking out the window. I was looking outside the door. Those were not tourists. And if you allow, and we allow, a whole number of people in this country to convince people that we didn't see what we saw, I think we're headed to a very dangerous place. And instead of celebrating the fact that during a pandemic, more people voted than in the history of the United States, we should have celebrated that fact, not falsely claimed massive voter fraud and that we somehow didn't have a fair election. I think that the business community, and especially the small business community, has an obligation to make sure that they speak the truth. And whether it's for or against whoever, it could be for or against Democrats, it could be bipartisan in nature, which it should be. It could be for or against the administration. But my point is, we have to make sure that people understand what's fact, what's fiction, and that it's a real danger to a democracy for someone to be able to perpetuate lies and people believe it. This is the only country we have, and I will close on this quote from Alexis de Tocqueville, who was a French political scientist, and his quote about the greatness of America boiled down to America is great because of her ability to repair her faults. And so if we would have went through the history of this country without ever recognizing our faults, we would have never changed. And so the same thing stands today, that we're still in search of a more perfect union, and we have to repair our faults. And it goes from policing to systemic racism to poverty. It doesn't matter, but we need to work on it and be honest brokers about it. And the business community and the small business community has stepped up and been great. But in that space, there's a lot more we all can do.
Well, that certainly is a powerful close. And I think I only want to just say thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for spending time with us. And thank you for your leadership in building bridges and coalitions and the important partnerships between the business community and the administration and the public sector that are going to help us make a difference. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
I'll hand back over to Rhett.
Well, thank you, Congressman Richmond. It's always a pleasure to have you. And thank you, Franz, and the whole PayPal team for all of your efforts, everything you're doing on vaccines to help underserved entrepreneurs at this moment. We're going to have an amazing panel hearing from some CEOs. It's going to be moderated by a wonderful reporter from the Wall Street Journal. But before we do that, we wanted to preview some of Reimagine Main Street's latest research. So with that, it's my pleasure to turn the conversation over to a friend and colleague, someone who's really been spearheading an amazing set of data-driven insights. With that, over to you, Ms. Tammy Halevi.
Rhett, thank you so much. So as vaccines have become increasingly accessible and we're starting to see signs that the country is getting back to business, the Reimagine Main Street Network wanted to understand what small business owners were experiencing and whether any emerging recovery was felt equally by all business owners. So in partnership with National ACE, the US Black Chambers, Inc., and the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and PPS, we fielded a large-scale survey of small businesses. From the end of April until May 12th, for just about 2 weeks, small business owners responded to our online survey distributed through the network of the survey partners. As you can see, this effort yielded more than 1,300 complete responses to a very long survey, including more than 150 AAPI business owners, more than 400 Black or African American business owners, more than 220 Hispanic or Latinx business owners, 49 Native American business owners, and more than 480 white business owners. The majority of the respondents represent the smallest businesses that Congressman Richmond referred to as the fabric of community and the canary in the coal mine. This afternoon, we're going to present an overview of the survey and just some of the findings. You can find the full survey report on the reimaginemainstreet.org website. So with that, what did we find? The survey is rich with detail, but in a nutshell, here's the story. Small business owners are refreshingly optimistic, yet in spite of their optimism, we are not out of the woods yet, and signs of recovery are not experienced equally. You'll see that the differences are most stark when we overlay race and ethnicity, gender, and age. Finally, looking ahead, it's imperative to solve for two structural challenges if Main Street's MLK Boulevard, Cesar Chavez Ways are going to recover. The first is demand for relatively small dollar financing independent of race or ethnicity of the owner. And the second is addressing bias and barriers in access to capital for entrepreneurs of color. With that overview, let's dive right in. So as you can see, optimism prevails among small business owners. They're generally optimistic about their futures, with Hispanic or Latinx entrepreneurs expressing the highest degree of optimism at 87%. You'll see in a moment that this seems to be driven by younger Latino men. As Franz noted, the optimism is fueled by a number of things, including the availability of vaccines, confidence in the overall trajectory of the economy, and it's backstopped by relief, particularly the PPP. The majority of recipients of PPP loans, although it wasn't distributed equally, the majority of recipients of PPP loans said that infusion of capital was critical to keep their businesses afloat. So mindsets of business owners are an interesting thing because when business owners report what they're seeing and how long they expect for recovery, you might have anticipated a different story versus optimism. So we asked the respondents the extent to which they agreed or disagreed with the statement, "We have turned the corner on the pandemic and business is returning to normal." Overall, white respondents were most likely to agree, with API, Black or African American, and Native business owners least likely to agree, and with Latinx or Hispanic business owners somewhere in between. But as you can see on this slide, young Latinos report seeing recovery at the highest rates. I note that by contrast, Latinas, young Latinas, are among the least likely to report seeing this recovery. As you can see from the pink bar compared to the light blue bar, men overall are more likely to report seeing signs of recovery than women, but the overall spread is about 8%, and it rises to a gap of more than 30% between young Hispanic men and women. Finally, you'll see on this slide that the 50 plus API women, so older Asian women, Asian American women, report seeing recovery for their businesses at the lowest rates. Just 1 in 4 reported seeing and experiencing signs of recovery. So then we asked whether revenue had not been materially affected, or whether the business had already recovered, or if they weren't back to their pre-pandemic levels, how long they expected it would take to recover, with more than 6 months reflecting the longest time horizon. And overall, Native, API, and Black business owners expect the longest road to recovery. Not surprisingly, they were generally among the hardest hit businesses. But as with the question of seeing signs of recovery, what we see in the data is much more interesting when we disaggregated it further than just by race and ethnicity alone. As you can see here, women business owners generally expect a longer road to recovery. On average, white men expect the shortest time to recovery, with 60% reporting less than 6 months, compared to only 39% of men overall reporting the same expectation. By contrast, almost 3 in 4, or 72% of API women over 50, expect it will take them more than 6 months to recover. As you can see from this slide, 50 plus business owners also expect a slower recovery across the board. Older business owners expect a slower recovery, and that is independent of race, ethnicity, and gender. But a few things to call out here. Young Black men, meaning less than 50, expect recovery timelines more in line with 50 plus white women than with young white or Hispanic men, their peers. 50 plus API, regardless of gender, expect the longest road to recovery, with only 38% of respondents expecting to recover within 6 months. So, given where businesses tell us they are and their expected timelines for recovery, we asked a few questions about what they thought about drivers for recovery, including availability of talent and access to capital. When we asked the subset of employers about their confidence in their ability to retain or hire the right talent to operate or grow, the majority of respondents was not too concerned. But the story was very different when we asked about confidence in ability to access capital to meet working capital needs for entrepreneurs to achieve their growth, their working capital needs or growth aspirations. As I noted up top, 2 problems have to be addressed for Main Street to recover. We need relatively small dollar business financing, and we have to eliminate the bias and barriers in access to capital for entrepreneurs of color. Across race or ethnicity, very small businesses have pretty low confidence in their ability to access the capital they need to run or grow. We've known about this problem for a long time, and we saw it clearly in the early days of PPP. Deploying relatively small amounts of capital tends to be less profitable for financial institutions than financing in larger denominations, whether that's driven by the time and cost of underwriting or the fee structure for deploying grant capital when underwriting isn't necessary. Here you see that the vast majority of very small businesses are not confident that they can finance their businesses going forward. But when we then looked at larger businesses defined as businesses with at least $1 million in revenue, we see very clearly that entrepreneurs of color have far less confidence than their peers in their ability to access capital, and for good reason. We must eliminate the bias and radically reduce barriers for entrepreneurs of color to access capital. As you heard from Cedric Richmond and Franz before this presentation, efforts are underway in government and the private sector to do so, and we all think, I think we all agree, there is much more work to be done. So with that, these findings represent data from which we seek actionable insights. In order to help us assign meaning and context to these findings, we've assembled an amazing panel. It is now my great pleasure to welcome Amara Omeokwe, an economics reporter from the Wall Street Journal, whose beat includes labor markets and small business, to moderate a conversation among three incredibly effective and insightful small business advocates. Welcome to you, Amara, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Tammy, and thank you for having me. Very excited to have this next conversation with three great leaders who will be able to talk to us about some of the trends that we're seeing with small business right now and some of the trends that you just identified in the survey data. We have Ron Busby, who is President and CEO of the U.S. Black Chambers. We have Ramiro Cavazos, who's President and CEO of the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And we have Shailing Tong, who's President and CEO of the Asian Pacific Islander American Chamber of Commerce and Entrepreneurship. Thanks to all three of you for being here. Very much looking forward to this conversation. I want to start with one of the survey results that Tammy was talking about, which is the optimism that seems to be out there among small businesses. We see it in the Reimagine Main Street survey results. We see that in other surveys as well. Are you seeing this among your members? And if so, to what do you attribute that optimism, given all the challenges that small businesses have experienced over the last year? And Ron, we can start with you.
Great to be here. And I was really pleased with the comments that we heard from Cedric Richmond, as well as the results that we saw from the survey. So often, I think as leaders, we have passion, we speak to the issues, but when you have data, you have talking points, and you have partnerships at the White House to really be able to understand the challenges that you have, it makes our conversations that much more easy. I think from us, what we're hearing is that our community across the country feels positive because of two facets: people and policy. We've seen the election of President Biden, as well as the individuals that have now been given the opportunity to lead his policy agenda. So you have good policy being implemented, and you have good people there to make sure that there's accountability and transparency there. We've seen policy in reference to the American Rescue Plan that has provided the needed capital for small business owners. We've also heard a great deal about the proposed infrastructure bill. And when you start talking about contract opportunities, that gives optimism to Black business owners, because we are hoping to see that those opportunities actually develop in our communities. And I think most of all, you're also seeing that our communities are now excited about the reopening of America as it relates to the vaccine. We've seen a great program laid out by this administration. All of the panelists that are on the call today have actually taken leadership roles in our communities to make sure that our businesses, as well as our individuals and communities, have access to the vaccine. And when we put all of those in a conversation as well as an advocacy voice, I think our communities, especially for Black communities, are optimistic about the future.
Ramiro?
Well, I'm so honored to be here with you, Amara and Ron and Chiling, my great colleagues. I agree that by nature, our businesses, especially Hispanic, Asian, and Black businesses, are optimistic about the future. Quite frankly, it's in our DNA, because we have had to fight the good fight for centuries in this nation to be resilient and overcome obstacles. I agree with Congressman Richmond and Franz that it's not just capital, it's contracts, it's business. And on behalf of the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, our 61 million Hispanics in the country and 5 million Hispanic-owned businesses and more than 260 Hispanic chambers of commerce throughout the country in Puerto Rico, we believe in the future, but we need three things. We need capital, creative forms of capital, not just traditional lending that builds debt. And so that's where the PPP comes in and the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. We also need, quite frankly, contracts, connections. The US government is the largest buying service in the world. And we want to make sure that every department head has goals to spend with our constituents and Fortune 1000 firms. I'm so glad that PayPal was with Franz leading that effort because they have been a quiet leader throughout this effort. And the last point is capacity. We want to make sure through the Minority Business Development Agency and the Small Business Administration that we strengthen our small businesses that have really taken a big hit. So we call them the 3 C's: connections, capital, and capacity building. But all of that gives us the optimism that my colleague Ron referenced is so important because that optimism is going to take us forward, Amara.
Thank you, Romeo. Shalene?
Yes, Amara, thank you so much for moderating this panel. I just cannot agree more with Ron and Romero. Data is just so important. It's a basic foundation for policymaker and also other corporations and the community to follow. So I really appreciate PayPal and also PPS mainstream, Reimagine Main Street to put all this together. AAPI business are very, very helpful for 2021 and beyond. Our community may feel more optimistic about the future because it's a result of being forced to adopt, which minority small business owners have done better than other small business owners across the US. Because of their adaptability and a minority small business owner may feel more ready to weather the storm. Minority business owner can credit their resilience to history or share experience of overcoming, strong community ties and a belief in American dream. We always work harder for the future despite difficult situation or external environment. And they acknowledge a need for greater support, and as a result, they have consistently been more resilient from the government, from their community, and are all adaptable. As a new immigrant to this country, even myself, I think we're grateful and proud to come here, and we see a land of opportunity, more so than those who have been here for a long, long time. For national aids, we represent 2.2 million AAPI business owners, and we have seen a number of AAPI businesses pivoting and changing their business models during this pandemic to keep their business open. This digital innovations like offering webinar training, use more social media, offering curbside pickup, delivery, help make the business, AAPI business community stay more connected to their customer and help them reach more customers they had never purchased from them before. So my hope is during this challenging time is that the AAPI and also minority business community can become more visible, and that makes getting more involved in public service, mainstream media, and lifestyle culture.
I want to follow up on something that you all have talked about, each one of you, which is access to capital. And we saw on the survey results that one of the things that is driving optimism right now is that support from the federal government in the form of PPP and other SBA programs. So PPP is ending soon. It ends in just a couple of days. So I wonder, what does the landscape of access to capital look like right now? And what are the lessons learned from the pandemic that could potentially help the access to capital situation as we continue in this recovery? Who wants to take it?
I'd be happy to just do a quick start here, Amada. What's so important is the fact that the capital is great to get going and to support our businesses. but it's very clear that we were already redlined before COVID. 2 out of every 10 Hispanic-owned businesses that applied for capital even received approval of those loans. And so there were challenges already with our small businesses. We believe small business is big business, all of us on this panel. And it's very clear that even if you don't provide that capital, if you're a traditional bank or a community bank, there are unintended consequences. It could be that business, that minority-owned business, is a tenant in your commercial building and they run a business out of there. And if that loan is not made, you lose your loan at the bank if you own that commercial building. So we're so interconnected. That's one thing we learned, Amara, through all of this. And so, we need to be collaborative. We need to have solidarity, realizing that small business is big business, and we need to support one another. Even if it's a multi-billionaire that owns huge assets, they need to want to have Ron's businesses, Chiling's, and ours get that capital, because in turn, it's going to fuel the future economy of this country that is driven by small business.
Amara, I think part of the solution is going to be access to capital, because again, it is the #1 concern for the majority of small-owned businesses. But what we also found that in the last 12 months, technical assistance was extremely important. And that's why we were excited about the Navigator program that the SBA is discussing rolling out in the near future. 68% of the businesses that we found, of the 2.6 million Black firms owned in the country, said that they didn't get the payroll protection plan, not because they didn't have the acumen or that they didn't have a good business or even that they didn't have good customers. It was the relationships that they did not have with banks. That is going to be extremely important this next go around in the future, as well as the technical assistance to be able to apply for not just loans, but for low interest rates, to find out how to make sure that we're taking advantage of grants that are made available both through the private sector and the public sector, as well as understanding the documentation, understanding our profit and loss statements, so that we understand how to maintain through good and bad times. Providing access to capital is extremely important, but making sure that we have the skills and the acumen to not only be able to apply for it, but to be able to implement good programs to keep us profitable in the future.
Yeah, Ron, thank you so much for your comments. As I indicated, survey is so important. We had a corporate with Reimagine Main Street last time had a survey, and we realized about 53% of AAPI business reports increased debt to keep their business operating. So access to capital is one problem. For AAPI community, language barrier, technology difficulties are also problems, but it's all related together. Because their language barrier, they are not able to know what kind of opportunity they have. So based on our last survey, 60% of AAPI business who did not apply for any federal relief say they did not apply because they did not think they were eligible for any relief. So I think they have language barriers, and also they have technology difficulties, because a lot of loan application, you have to go through all the, use technology to apply for that. And another very important thing is we need to have a government to work with all the chamber, like we are here today, and other nonprofit organizations to share the information to the community as much as they have. I think this pandemic has very difficult for small business. The access to capital is definitely a very, very challenging part for a lot of us.
Ron, I want to go back to you, because we know coming out of the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, Black Americans, their recovery lagged in a lot of respects. Our recovery lagged. Is this recovery shaping up to be similar, or is it different? And we saw in the survey results some concerns about the recovery taking longer. What are you feeling about that?
Yeah, I truly believe that, early on, the U.S. Black Chamber did a survey with our 149 Black chambers across the country. And early on, we were saying that we were going to lose 35 to 40% of Black-owned businesses. no one really heard us. No one really wanted to get behind our advocacy until the data came out. And so like Shailene stated, data is extremely important. But when we talk to our members across the country, many of the Black women are saying, hey, they're having concerns. Should I reopen? Should I stay home? Should I send my children off to school where they may or may not have access to the vaccine? So it's a convoluted conversation in reference to the concern that Black communities are having. Many Black employees were forced to go back to work, calling themselves the essential worker, and now those jobs aren't available anymore. And so for our community, the Black businesses across the country, it is a very convoluted conversation. Many of them are saying, yes, we want to reopen, we want to get back into business, but the concerns are still there in reference to opportunities. When we saw those businesses close down in our communities, many of those same storefronts were now being reopened by majority companies. And so not only did we lose those businesses in our communities, but we lost the revenue, we lost those customers, the vendors that they work with, and potentially the employees as well. And so many of us are saying, okay, we want to go back into business, but many of the businesses that we have historically been into aren't going to be there in the traditional ways and methodology in which they're running today. And so the concern is what does the future really hold for Black businesses reopening in this new mainstream of America?
Shailene, what about you? Because we know that many Asian-owned businesses started seeing the negative impacts of the pandemic very early on, even as early as January and February last year. How has the length of how long this crisis has lasted affected Asian-owned businesses? And are there pockets of the community that you are concerned about, even amid the broader optimism that you're hearing about?
Yeah, I tell you, for this situation, it has been very, very challenging for Asian business community because they are dealing with two illness. One is COVID, another one is anti-AAPI hate. And I have to say that we really applaud President Biden's memorandum on combating racism and also intolerance against AAPI. And we are very pleased, also we are very pleased to see the passing of a COVID Hate Crimes Act. So for a lot of older workers, they are very afraid, if they go out, are they going to reopen the store? So they are just having so many concerns. And many business owner, they still could not take advantage of the recovery program because of also the time constraint and just as I said, language barriers. So we really hope a policymaker to expand timing for minority business to apply and increase access to financial resources as the economic recovers.
Ramir, I want to ask you about one of the survey results that Tammy was talking about, which show that there seems to be a little bit more optimism among young Hispanic men when compared to their to young Hispanic women. What do you think is driving that sort of discrepancy?
Well, I wish I could say as a young Hispanic man, we are optimistic by nature, but as a vintage Hispanic man, I would say that we see the long view, Amara. We as a community, like our Asian brothers and sisters and Black brothers and sisters, we have been to this rodeo before many times. And we have had to overcome major economic crises before, especially the most recent Great Recession in 2008 that you had talked to Ron and of course Chiling about. We're survivors. We believe in comeback stories as a Hispanic community, and then we're multi-ethnic. We're not a race. We're of course Asian if you're Filipino or Korean and half Panamanian, or if we're Black if we're Dominican or Cuban or Brazilian and American, and then of course crossover with our Spanish blood into white and Caucasian. So we have been under the radar for a long time as a community, but we see the long view, and we are very much solidarity driven, and collaborators. The point that I would leave you with, Amada, is creativity and innovation in our collective communities are at their highest level ever, because we have had to react to building a plane in midair at the same time we're trying to fly it, especially when it comes to keeping our businesses surviving and adjusting. And so that's why we're optimistic. We're also a very young community and a large community. So I believe that a big part of that optimism is fueled by the sheer numbers alone in our collective Latino and Latina community. And so I believe that it's really just the numbers that are driving the future of the US economy, because we see this country and the American dream as our dream that we helped build through our communities for more than 500 years. Some of us were brought here, like the Black community, and you know, there's a whole separate conversation around that we need to embrace, and the unfairness and the tragedy behind that. And of course, our Asian community, the longstanding patience with, you know, hate crimes. It's time to not be patient any longer, as our communities together are working hard to get our fair share of the economic pie of this nation, and it's about damn time.
Thank you, Ramiro. Well, time has gone so fast. I'm out of time. I had so many more questions, but I want to thank each of you for your insights and for your leadership on small businesses. And Tammy, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Amara, and thank you to Ron Busby, Ramiro Cavazos, and Xiling Tong. Small businesses are so well served by you and your respective organizations, and frankly, Reimagine Main Street is strong for your partnership. Please join me in thanking Franz Pasha from PayPal and Cedric Richmond for their leadership and vision. PayPal's commitment to racial equity stands out for its early and bold vision of closing the racial wealth gap. We value their engagement today and with Reimagine Main Street. And finally, thank you to all who participated in this conversation. We invite you to inform the network, shape our future research, and/or participate in future sessions. The survey and the recording of this session will be made available following today. Thank you for taking the time. The session is now over.